Their picture taken in front of the helicopter. That's quite a shot for that officer to have. Marine One sitting in front of the Capitol dome.
Not something you see all the time.
No. And you would note the flags. That one flag you can see flying in front of the Capitol dome back up at full staff after they had been lowered for the Jimmy Carter warning.
We see now people from that motorcade have been making their way into the Capitol. That includes President-elect Donald Trump. We're looking now inside the Capitol Rotunda. There you see Elon Musk, one of those businessmen who are invited to be part of this very small, relatively speaking, swearing-in ceremony. There's Melania Trump. Second gentleman, Doug Emhoff.
Good morning, Mr. Vice President. How do you feel?
There's J.D. Vance and his wife, Lucia. And we talked about this Capitol Rotunda really not having a lot of extra space, Sagar, for even those former lawmakers that we would usually anticipate being there for an event like this. But when we see these images and really just kind of note how close together everyone is, there is just not extra room to get maybe even one or two more people aside from what they've been able to plan for. It's a different kind of situation, but
shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah,
and you
pretty
can
much.
see in the front in that shot the current members of the Senate kind of crammed together. You had Mark Warner, a Democrat from Virginia, next to John Barrasso, a Republican from Wyoming, who was next to Dick Durbin, the #2 Senate Democrat from Illinois, all kind of clustered very close together here. Talked earlier about Brett Kavanaugh being the one who will administer the oath to J.D. Vance. Vance is only 40. Be not the youngest vice president, but one of them. There was a 36-year-old vice president, but that was back in James Buchanan's administration in the late 50s. But there have been others in their 40s, Al Gore, Teddy Roosevelt, but breaking with a bit of precedent here. A fairly young J.D. Vance set to take the oath of office, followed, of course, by the oldest man to take the oath as president in Donald Trump.
We're seeing now some members of the incoming Trump administration walking into the rotunda. Clearly, those confirmation hearings for a number of positions have been ongoing in the Senate for at least a week, a little over, and we anticipate those to resume again tomorrow. There have not been official votes, but there will be some more open hearings as well as some business meetings and markups of some of the committee work before a lot of those nominations proceed to the full Senate for their vote.
You had Kevin Hassett, who was looking to come back as the Trump White House's top economist after serving in that role in the first Trump administration. Tulsi Gabbard, who would be the national intelligence chief, Pam Bondi, Doug Burgum, all lined up there to watch the man they hope is their boss to be taking the oath.
Susie Wiles, White House Chief of Staff.
It used to be fun at these outdoor events on the West Front to look around it again. You'd see the justices of the Supreme Court sitting together. You'd see the Joint Chiefs, the nation's top military officers, sitting together and taking a look out at the crowd. In fact, we just got to look at General C.Q. Brown, who is the now outgoing chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the nation's top military officer. Former Vice President Dan Quayle and Marilyn Quayle making their way inside the rotunda. We don't get a lot of Dan Quayle sightings in Washington lately, but that's now 2 in 2 weeks after he was here for Jimmy Carter's funeral.
Indeed.
We talk about young vice presidents like J.D. Vance. Dan Quayle, basically an unknown congressman when George H.W. Bush tapped him to be vice president in 1989.
It is rare to get all of these officials together in the same space, but I think there have been a lot of remarks lately about how that does happen at inaugurations and funerals, and we have had 2 of those in close proximity here in Washington in recent weeks.
It is reassuring, frankly, is that for those of us who spend so much time covering the division here in Washington and the rancor, to see these people sit next to each other, to chat with them, to do what George W. Bush did at the Carter funeral and literally tap Barack Obama on the belly as he walked by.
Former Vice President Mike Pence coming in. Clearly he was vice president in Trump's first administration. Now joining the dignitaries who are in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda.
To see a lot of Elon Musk today. He will be speaking at the parade of sorts inside Capital One Arena later today. Has been almost a constant by the president-elect's side since the last time you and I were in this room in November for the election.
And up until then, he had stumped so heavily for Trump on the campaign trail, particularly in Pennsylvania, which was one of those major areas of focus. But yes, was part of the events at Capital One Arena last night with his son X, who actually joined him on stage with Donald Trump and didn't make his own remarks, but certainly was part of his father's remarks. But now we see Musk there again in the Capitol Rotunda and will be the incoming head of the Department of Government Efficiency, not an official government agency, but intended to cut costs throughout the government, something that Donald Trump has asked Elon Musk to be in charge of. So we will see what that agency or what that department accomplishes.
A new agency to cut back on the other agencies. With Vivek Ramaswamy, who we saw earlier, he's there somewhere. There's nowhere really to hide in the rotunda.
No,
so
we'll
much
see
room.
him. We'll see him pop back up. Not a lot of space.
It looks a lot bigger when you're in there and there aren't 600 people.
It does. There's Robert F. Kennedy Jr., again appointed by Trump to head the Department of Health and Human Services, yet to have a hearing on Capitol Hill, although that is anticipated to be among some of the more contentious confirmation hearings that could be happening for this administration.
Now, the other side of that shot, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State designate, who did testify last week, and another tech titan, Jeff Bezos. We talked earlier about what's in the Constitution about the inauguration. There's nothing about a parade, there's nothing about balls, there's nothing about how you get to and from the Capitol. It's the date and it's the oath. That's it. Everything else has kind of evolved organically. In this case, evolved due to the weather. But all it prescribes is that by noon, that oath has to be taken. We are just over an hour away from that and should be approximately 55 minutes, let's say, from Donald Trump reciting those 35 words for a second time.
Former President Bill Clinton and former First Lady and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton coming into the rotunda.
Hillary Clinton said watching Donald Trump take the oath 8 years ago after he beat her in that election was one of the hardest days of her life, but she felt a duty to be there and again to be here today with her husband, the former president.
Former President George W. Bush and First Lady Laura Bush.
We lamented that the indoors are going to rob us of one of the great visuals from inaugurations past. George W. Bush sitting there in his
clear poncho.
Yeah, almost looked to be a homemade rain cover of sorts.
Yeah, with this being inside, we really don't get to see that winter weather gear, unfortunately. There's former President Barack Obama also coming in. Without former First Lady Michelle Obama, who notably said that she would not be attending this inauguration. Also did not attend Jimmy Carter's funeral here in Washington a few weeks ago.
Obama's office did not say why the former First Lady would not be here today. They did say she had a prior engagement during the Carter funeral, but again, pointedly, did not offer a reason for her absence today.
We're still taking a look inside the Capitol Rotunda there on the left-hand side, but on the right, that is again the Capital One Arena where Donald Trump, after he is inaugurated, will be making his way in what would be the inaugural parade is now subbed in for an indoor event there at Capital One Arena here in Washington. People have been gathering there for hours, and they will be still waiting for some hours before the new president arrives. But these are a lot of his strong supporters, and assuredly they will still be there by the time he shows up.
And as they watched the images from the rotunda on the big screen inside the arena, some boos as Mike Pence walked in, and then a lot more boos as Bill and Hillary Clinton were shown on there.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, please take your seats.
Folks in the Capital One Arena are able to watch all of the ceremonies and events from the Capitol Rotunda on the Jumbotron screen there in the middle of the arena.